AITA for refusing to take care of my niece after she called me a slur. Hey everyone, first off, I want to apologize if this post gets too long or if my English isn't perfect. It's not my first language. I've been thinking about this for days now, and I still can't shake the feeling that I need to share this somewhere and get some outside perspective. It's been eating away at me, and I can't tell if I was completely justified in my reaction or if I took things too far. So here it goes. For some context, I'm a 29-year-old guy, married to my wonderful wife. 30 female, and we have 2 boys, a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. My wife works a demanding full-time office job that she loves and is amazing at, while I work from home. I have a job with incredibly flexible hours basically. As long as I meet my deadlines and attend the occasional Zoom meeting, no one really cares when or how I get my work done. Because of this, I've taken on the role of primary caregiver for our kids. I'm the one who handles daycare drop-offs and pickups, meal prep, cleaning, and most of the day-to-day parenting. It works well for us. My wife and I are a team, and we're both proud of the balance we've struck in our marriage. Now, let me introduce my sister, Barb 26F, and her husband, Nick 30M. They live nearby and have a 5-year-old daughter, Tracy, who is the same age as my older son. Barb and Nick both work full-time, and their schedules are pretty hectic. When Tracy started daycare around the same time as my boys, I volunteered to help out. Since I was already dropping off and picking up my kids, I figured it wasn't a big deal to add Tracy into the mix. Honestly, I thought it was great. My kids got to spend more time with their cousin, and I liked being the cool uncle. For the past year or so, this has been our routine. I pick up all 3 kids, bring them back to my house, and keep them entertained until Barb or Nick comes to pick Tracy up in the evening. I make snacks, sometimes dinner, and they play or watch TV together. It felt good to help out my sister, and I thought it was a win-win for everyone involved. That all changed a few days ago. It was a normal afternoon. I picked up the kids from daycare, brought them home, and set them up in the living room to watch Blue while I prepped some snacks. My 3-year-old was in the kitchen with me, helping in his own little way, which mostly involved stealing baby carrots and banging pots together. I could hear the kids laughing and talking in the living room, and everything seemed fine until suddenly, it wasn't. Out of nowhere, I heard yelling. Not the typical "he took my toy" kind of yelling, but real, angry shouting. I rushed into the living room to see my son standing up, his face red and his little fists clenched. He was yelling, "My dad's not a girl." Tracy, just as red-faced, was yelling back, He's a faggot." That's like a girl. The word she used is in our language, but it's a slur similar to calling someone gay in a derogatory way. I froze. For a moment, I didn't even know how to react. Tracy is 5. She's always been such a sweet, polite kid, the kind who says please and thank you without prompting, who draws pictures of her family with big smiling faces and hands them out like treasures. Hearing her say something so hateful, especially directed at me, was like a slap in the face. My son, sitting on the couch next to her, was glaring at her, his cheeks flushed and tears welling up in his eyes. He looked like he didn't know whether to shout at her or start crying. And Tracy, she just sat there, her little arms crossed over her chest, her face twisted into a look of defiance I'd never seen on her before. It wasn't the innocent stubbornness of a child refusing to eat her vegetables. It was something harsher, colder, like she truly believed she was right to say what she'd said. I turned off the TV, the sudden silence amplifying the tension in the room. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the heat rising in my face, but I took a deep breath and sat them both down. I told Tracy, as calmly as I could manage, that the word she used was very bad. I kept my voice steady, even though every part of me wanted to demand why she would say something so cruel. "We don't call people names like that," I said. "It's hurtful and mean, and it's not okay." I could see her eyes flicker for a moment, maybe realizing she was in trouble, but the defiance didn't leave her face. Instead, she dug in deeper, her little chin jutting forward as she said, "I don't have to apologize. That's what my dad calls you, and he's not in trouble." The room seemed to tilt for a second. My mind reeled, trying to process what she'd just said. Nick, my brother-in-law, had been saying this about me to my sister, in front of Tracy, a 5-year-old. I struggled to find the right words, the right questions, anything to make sense of this. What do you mean? I asked, keeping my tone gentle even though I was anything but calm inside. Through careful, deliberate prodding, because carefully prodding a 5-year-old is like trying to untangle a ball of yarn with one hand. I managed to piece together the story. Nick had told Barb, in front of Tracy, that men shouldn't be sitting at home all day doing childcare. According to him, cooking and cleaning are women's work, and the fact that my wife earns more money than I do makes me not a real man. Tracy, being 5, had taken this all at face value, the way kids do when they hear something from someone they trust, and she'd parroted it back to me in the most cutting way imaginable. The realization felt like a punch to the gut. My mind raced with anger, not just at Nick for saying those things, but at Barb for sitting there and letting him. Did she agree with him? Did she laugh it off? Did she even defend me? I looked back at Tracy, her little face still set with defiance but starting to crack under my steady gaze. I wanted to be furious with her, to scold her for being so cruel, but I knew she was too young to fully understand what she'd done. She didn't come up with those words on her own. She was repeating what she'd heard from the adults in her life. What your dad said is wrong, I told her firmly. I made sure to keep my voice calm but strong. Doing housework or taking care of kids doesn't make someone less of a man. It's not about being a boy or a girl, it's about being a good person. Just like working in an office doesn't make your Aunt Sarah less of a woman, doing things like cooking and cleaning doesn't make me like a girl. I could see my words starting to sink in, but it wasn't enough. I had to push a little further, not just for her sake but for mine. After more coaxing, more careful explanations about kindness and respect and the importance of not repeating everything we hear, Tracy finally muttered an apology. Her voice was small, her eyes downcast, but the damage was done. I felt humiliated, not just by the words of a 5-year-old, but by the realization of where they'd come from. My brother-in-law, my sister. These were people I trusted, people who should have had my back, and yet they'd sat there, in their home, tearing me down in front of their child. That evening, I told my wife everything. She was furious. We've always been proud of the partnership we've built, and to hear that someone we consider family was mocking it behind our backs felt like a betrayal. I told her I needed to confront Barb and Nick and demand an apology. She agreed. I called Barb. I told her what had happened and repeated everything Tracy had said. Her response, "It's just a word. You're blowing this out of proportion. Nick doesn't dislike you or anything." I couldn't believe it. I told her that whether Nick likes me or not isn't the point. He was bad-mouthing me to my niece, teaching her to disrespect me, and undermining everything I do for their family. I told her I deserved an apology, from both her and Nick. She brushed it off and said, "That's just how Nick is. You're being a drama queen." That was it. Something inside me snapped. I told her to fuck off and said if that's how she felt, she could figure out her own daycare arrangements. Then I hung up. I know it was really short notice and rude, but I really felt like I was being disrespected by people I did so much for over the years, and were my family. My wife said she understood, and that I shouldn't back down until I at least get a proper apology. The weekend after everything went down was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, there was no daycare, which meant I didn't have to face the awkwardness of ignoring my sister's situation right away. On the other hand, the silence was deafening. I expected calls or texts from Barb to try and smooth things over or at least to argue some more, but nothing came. That silence did something to me. It didn't feel like peace or resolution. It felt like she wasn't taking me seriously, like my words and feelings didn't matter at all. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. By the time Monday rolled around, I was still stewing. I dropped off my kids at daycare as usual, but I didn't pick up Tracy. I knew it would cause problems for Barb, but I didn't care. I told her what would happen if I didn't get an apology. She had 2 full days to figure out alternative arrangements, and if she chose to ignore that, it wasn't my problem. It felt petty, sure, but in a way, it also felt good. I was done bending over backward for people who clearly didn't respect me. The calls started coming mid-morning. I ignored them at first. Barb called a few times, sent a couple of texts, then called again. Around noon, I decided to pick up, thinking I could finally lay this to rest. I was ready to hear her apology, graciously accept it, and move forward, but that's not what happened. As soon as I answered, she unleashed on me. She was furious, yelling about how irresponsible I was, how I had flaked on her, and how my actions had made her late for work. I listened for a moment, my anger bubbling up again, and finally cut her off. I told her, as calmly as I could, that I had explicitly told her this would happen. She had 2 days to make other arrangements. If she was late for work, that was on her, not me. But she kept yelling, and I wasn't about to stand there and take it, so I hung up. The texts kept coming throughout the day. Some were demands for me to pick Tracy up. Others were guilt trips about how I was punishing her and making things harder for her at work. I didn't respond to most of them. Eventually, I told her I wouldn't be picking Tracy up, and then I stopped replying altogether. I was done engaging in a one-sided argument where I was the only one expected to compromise. When I picked up my boys that afternoon, Tracy was waiting too. She ran up to me, assuming I'd take her home like usual, and it absolutely broke my heart to tell her I wouldn't be. She didn't understand what was going on. All she knew was that her fun afternoons at our house had been taken away, and it wasn't fair to her. I bent down and explained as gently as I could that her mom and I were fighting, but once we worked things out, she could come back over. She looked so sad and confused, and it took everything in me not to cave. But I didn't. I took my boys and left. Later that evening, I got a call from my mom. Apparently, Barb had roped her into picking Tracy up from daycare. Now, my mom is disabled and struggles with mobility, so this was no small thing for her. She was clearly having a hard time with it, and she called to ask why I was being mean to Barb. I was shocked. I thought my mom, of all people, would understand and take my side, but she didn't. When I explained everything to her, she brushed it off with, "You know how Nick is." That was the last thing I wanted to hear. I told my mom that the more I realized how Nick is, the less I liked it. If he thought so little of me and the work I did for their family, then I sure as hell wasn't going to keep doing free labor for him. My mom said I was blowing things out of proportion, that I should be the bigger man, and that I shouldn't let it get to me. But that wasn't the point. I told her that all I'd asked for was a simple apology. Instead of getting that, I was being treated like I was the bad guy. I ended the call by telling her I was done with the whole thing and to have fun handling Tracy. That night, Nick called me. I almost didn't answer, but part of me hoped he was finally going to apologize and put this whole mess behind us. Instead, he started lecturing me about how my behavior was causing Barb so much distress. He said we were family, and he couldn't believe I was doing this to my own sister. I let him talk for a bit before calmly pointing out that if we were family, he shouldn't have been bad-mouthing me to his kid. I told him that all of this could have been avoided if he'd just apologized. Nick's response, he said he was only joking, that it was all in good fun, and I was being too sensitive. I told him it wasn't good or fun for me, and I wanted an apology. That's when he blew up. He called me a slur again, accused me of being a hysterical little girl, and said I couldn't take a joke. I was so angry I couldn't see straight. I told him to fuck off and hung up. That led to even more calls from Barb and my mom, none of which I answered. Barb sent me a long text about how unfair it was for Tracy to pay the price for my pettiness. I fired back, saying it wasn't fair for Tracy to pay the price for her parents being ungrateful pieces of shit. That was the end of that conversation. I told her that unless her next message was an apology, I'd be blocking her number. Her next message wasn't an apology, so I blocked her. Over the next few days, my mom continued picking up Tracy from daycare, but it was clear she was struggling. Every time I saw Tracy, she'd ask why she couldn't come to our house. She hated going home with my mom, and she made that very clear. It hurt so much to see her like that, but I knew I had to stand my ground. If I gave in now, I'd be telling my family that it was okay to walk all over me and ignore my boundaries. Still, it's been rough. Tracy is a good kid, and none of this is her fault. I hate that she's caught in the middle of this, but I don't know what else to do. I feel like I deserve an apology, and letting this go without one would set a terrible precedent. At the same time, I love my niece and don't want her to resent me or feel like I abandoned her. So AITA, what should I do? Edit. Wow, I wasn't expecting so much support and insight. Thank you to everyone who's taken the time to comment. A lot of you have brought up the possibility that Nick wants Barb to quit her job, and honestly, that's a really concerning thought. I hadn't considered it before, but now I'm starting to wonder if there's something to it. It's also becoming clear that Barb might not have the resources to handle this situation, especially with their mortgage and financial strain. For now, I'm going to keep standing my ground. I'll also make sure to let Tracy know that I love her and that none of this is her fault. Hopefully, Barb will eventually realize that that's just how Nick isn't an excuse and that I'm not going to let her or him treat me like this. Thank you all again. Update. Alright, so I posted this yesterday, and I just want to start by saying thank you to everyone who commented, offered advice, and showed support. I was completely overwhelmed by the sheer number of responses, and I spent hours going through them. There were some tough love comments, some heartfelt stories from people in similar situations, and even a few lightbulb moments that really got me thinking. I realized that I might have been approaching this situation in a way that wasn't productive, at least not in terms of protecting Tracy, so I feel like this situation deserves an update. Barb and Nick have a very different financial situation. They live in a big house, drive fancy cars, and put on the appearance of wealth. But the reality is, they're drowning in a mortgage and loans. They're always strapped for cash and constantly stressed about money. My wife and I do well financially, not crazy rich, but comfortable, and it's pretty clear that Barb and Nick resent that. The outpouring of advice on my original post helped me realize that I needed to find a middle ground. I couldn't keep letting them walk all over me, but I also couldn't let Tracy suffer for the actions of her parents. One comment really stuck with me. It was from someone who had been in Tracy's position as a kid, and they described how hurt and confused they'd felt when an adult they loved pulled away. I couldn't let that happen to her. She's just a kid. She didn't choose this situation, and as much as I hated the thought of caving, I realized I needed to find a way to protect her without sacrificing my boundaries. So, I decided to take the day off work to think things through and figure out a plan. The first step was unblocking my sister. If I was going to interact with Tracy, her mom needed to be able to reach me. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was necessary. The next step was talking to my mom. She'd been struggling with picking up Tracy, and I could see it was taking a toll on her physically and emotionally. She's not confrontational by nature and just wants to keep the peace, but in this situation, she went about it all wrong. I explained everything to her again, but this time, I kept my tone calm and avoided the snark. I used an analogy someone had shared in the comments about rocking the boat, how people like Nick destabilize the boat, and the rest of the family scrambles to keep it steady instead of holding the person responsible accountable. I also pointed out that as her son, my feelings should at least warrant the benefit of the doubt before she sides against me. Eventually, it seemed to sink in. She apologized, and we hugged it out. I wouldn't say I am no longer mad at her, but I think she finally understands where I'm coming from. Next, I texted Barb and told her we needed to talk. I added that I'd be dropping Tracy off at their house that evening, which got a curt thumbs up emoji in response. When I picked up Tracy from daycare, she was absolutely overjoyed to see me. She clung to my side all afternoon, barely leaving my side, which was both adorable and heartbreaking. It made me realize just how much my decision had impacted her. I explained to her, as best as I could, that she wasn't in trouble and that I wasn't angry with her, but I was upset with her parents and needed to work things out with them. She seemed relieved, and by the time I dropped her off that evening, she was in a much better mood. Once Tracy was in bed, I sat down with Barb and Nick. I made it clear from the start that I wasn't there to argue, but they needed to hear me out. I told them flat out that my mom wouldn't be covering for them anymore. If they interrupted me or refused to listen, I'd walk out, and they'd need to find new childcare arrangements. I didn't actually plan on following through with that threat, but they didn't know that, and it worked. For the first time, they were quiet and let me speak. I laid out the new terms. First, I would no longer be dropping Tracy off in the mornings. There had to be some lasting impact for the way Nick acted. Second, I wouldn't be paying for family outings or vacations anymore. If Nick believed so strongly in traditional gender roles, then he could step up and support his family himself. The only exception would be Tracy. She was always welcome. Lastly, I made it clear that if I heard any more trash talk about me behind my back, I'd start charging them for childcare. I wanted them to understand that my time and effort weren't free, and they couldn't keep taking me for granted. Nick, predictably, wasn't happy. Barb had to take him outside to calm him down, but eventually, they both agreed to my terms. I even got an apology. It was half-hearted and insincere, but I decided to take it. At the end of the day, my priority is Tracy, and I didn't want to risk making the situation worse for her. There were no hugs or warm goodbyes, but I left their house feeling like I'd accomplished something. I still plan to have a one-on-one conversation with Barb about her relationship with Nick and how she views me, but I want to give things some time to settle before tackling that. I know this isn't the resolution some of you hoped for, but it's one I can live with. I found a way to stand my ground while still being there for Tracy, and for now, that's enough. Thank you all again for your advice and support.